Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. This time we're tackling that big question looming over the PC gaming world. Is 16 GB of VRAM the new must-have?
Yeah, a lot of buzz about that lately.
You guys sent in a ton of questions, especially after that XDA article and that Reddit thread. Things got pretty heated over there, so we're going to try to unpack all of this. Should we just be aiming for 16 gigs for like a good experience in 2025 and beyond? What do you think?
It's the question, right? Especially with all the new graphics cards coming out. Everyone's wondering, do I need to spend more to get those extra gigs of VRAM?
Right. Okay, so let's start with that XDA article. Joe Rice Jones, he basically drops a bombshell, right? Says 8 GB VRAM, done, over, finito.
Yeah, he didn't mince words.
No, he really didn't. And his argument's basically that these AAA games are just getting so demanding, all the textures, the effects, they eat up VRAM like crazy.
And he's speaking from experience, too. He talks about how even with the 12 GB RTX 4070 Ti, he was hitting VRAM limits, having to tweak settings just to keep things running smoothly.
Oof, yeah, I can imagine. That's got to be frustrating. So even 12 GB isn't enough anymore.
Well, it's starting to feel the squeeze, that's for sure.
Okay, so does this give AMD an advantage then? I mean, XDA mentions that AMD's going all in on 16 GB with their new RX 9000 series.
Seems like that's their play, yeah. They're targeting that mid-range market. And 16 GBs across the board could be a big selling point, especially if they can undercut Nvidia on price.
Especially with those rumors that Nvidia might be sticking with 8 GB on the RTX 5060 and 12 GB for the 5070.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Nvidia responds.
Okay, so that's XDA's take, but then we head over to Reddit, and, well, it's Reddit, so, opinions are flying everywhere.
Yeah, definitely. Lots of folks chiming in. Some are saying, yep, I'm hitting those VRAM limits too, especially in certain games. Others are like, nah, 12 GB is fine for me, especially at 1440p. Just got to tweak a few settings.
So basically the eternal struggle, right? Do you want max settings or smooth performance?
Exactly. And that's where this whole idea of game optimization comes in. You get a well-optimized game, and it can work wonders even with less VRAM. But a poorly optimized one? Oh boy, it'll gobble up all the memory it can find.
Yeah, that's a good point for our listeners. If you're playing a game that's known for being well optimized, you might not need to sweat the VRAM as much.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, we also had people on Reddit bringing up the price of all this, GPUs are getting expensive.
Oh, yeah. And some folks are even speculating that Nvidia might be intentionally limiting VRAM on those lower-tier cards, like almost forcing people to upgrade to those pricier models if they want more.
That's a spicy take. Is that a conspiracy theory or like savvy business? I don't know.
Maybe a bit of both. It definitely raises the question of, are these higher prices just reflecting the cost of components, or is there some strategy at play here?
Yeah, something to ponder. Okay, so we've got XDA sounding the alarm on 8 GB, AMD maybe shaking things up with 16, and Reddit's a whole roller coaster of opinions. But then there's this one thread that I found really interesting. It's about consoles. Like, how do they fit into all of this?
Yeah, the console factor. Some people are pointing out that the PS5 and Xbox Series X, they both have 16 GB of total memory, but it's shared, right?
Right.
They only dedicate about 8 GB to VRAM. The rest is for the system.
Right.
So their point is, if consoles can run these graphically demanding games with that setup, why do PC gamers suddenly need a full 16 GB of dedicated VRAM?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Are those folks who are saying ATB is dead just like overreacting?
Well, it's not quite that simple. There's a key difference here. Consoles, they have a fixed hardware target. Developers know exactly what they're working with, so they have to optimize their games to run well within those limitations.
So you're saying maybe, just maybe, PC game developers have gotten a little lazy because they know we often have more powerful hardware to throw at the problem.
It's possible, yeah. Goes back to that optimization thing. If console games are generally pretty well optimized to run on less VRAM, maybe that 8 GB in your PC isn't totally doomed after all.
Okay, so there's still hope for us 8 GB folks.
Potentially.
But it does sound like 16 GB is like the target to aim for now, right? Especially for future-proofing.
It's looking that way, yeah.
All right. But before we get too carried away with the VRAM hype, I think it's important to remember it's just one piece of the puzzle, right? It's not the whole story when it comes to performance.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
you can have all the VRAM in the world, but if your GPU itself isn't powerful enough, it's not going to do you much good.
Right. It's like having a sports car with a tiny gas tank. It's not going to get you very far.
Exactly. You need that horsepower, you need that memory speed, and Yeah, the CPU matters too. Don't forget about that.
Oh, the CPU, the unsung hero. We've got a lot to consider here.
We do. This VRAM thing, it's just the tip of the iceberg.
All right, I think that's a good place to take a breath. We've covered a lot of ground, from XDA's bold claims to those console comparisons. But there's still so much more to unpack. And we're back. Still diving deep into this whole VRAM discussion, and I gotta say, it's pretty fascinating how much there is to unpack here. Before the break, we were talking about how consoles, they might actually be setting a good example for PC gaming when it comes to this whole optimization thing.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you think, right? If they can get those incredible looking games to run smoothly on consoles with limited VRAM, could PC developers be doing more?
Exactly. Like, could we be squeezing more performance out of our HEB cards if things were, I don't know, a bit more optimized on the PC side?
It's a valid argument for sure, and it brings us back to that point we made earlier. Don't panic if you've got an HEB card.
Yeah.
It might still have some life left in it, especially if you're willing to, maybe adjust some settings or be a little pickier about which games you play.
All right, so that's a little bit of good news for folks who might be worried about upgrading right away. But let's be real, technology, it marches on, and it does feel like the whole industry is kind of moving towards this 16 GB standard.
Yeah, you're right. And you can't ignore what AMD is doing, right? They're really pushing that 16 GB with their RX 9000 series. And if those cards deliver on performance, and the price is right, it could really put some pressure on Nvidia.
Speaking of NVIDIA, we were talking about those accusations that they might be intentionally undercutting VRAM on their lower tier cards. What do you think? Is there any truth to that?
Well, it's definitely a bit cynical, but I don't know, it's not completely out there. Think about it from a business perspective, right?
Mhm.
If Nvidia knows everyone's starting to look for 16 GB, it makes sense to position their higher-end cards as the premium option, with those lower-tier cards serving as a more budget-friendly alternative, even if they're a little limited.
So classic good, better, best marketing strategy. Get people to spend a little more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we see it everywhere, not just in tech.
True enough. But here's something I've been thinking about. We've been talking a lot about how developers need to be more mindful of VRAM, but what about us, the gamers? Do we have a role to play in all of this?
Absolutely. Gamers have a lot more power than they realize. Being informed about VRAM, understanding how it affects performance, that's huge. It means you can make better decisions about the games you buy, the settings you play on. You can also vote with your wallet, support developers who prioritize optimization.
Okay, so smart shoppers, savvy gamers, what else can we do?
Be vocal. Don't be afraid to speak up. If you're running into VRAM issues, let the developers know. Leave feedback on forums, write reviews, get those discussions going online. The more awareness we raise, the more likely we are to see some positive change in the industry.
I love that. We have a voice. Use it. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the future. If this trend continues, if 16 Abity does become the standard, what does that mean for PC gaming as a whole? Could we see like a whole new level of visual fidelity?
It's definitely possible, yeah. With all that VRAM, developers could really push the boundaries of realism. Imagine even more detailed textures, more complex environments, realistic lighting and effects. It's pretty exciting to think about.
It is exciting, but I got to play devil's advocate again, right? What if all that VRAM actually leads to complacency? What if developers get lazy and just rely on brute force memory power instead of, actually optimizing their
That's
games?
a valid concern, yeah. It's easier to take the path of least resistance, right? If
Yeah.
they know they have 16 GB to work with, they might not be as careful about making sure their games run well on systems with less VRAM, or for people who want to keep their hardware for a few years.
Right, so it's kind of a double-edged sword. More VRAM could be amazing for visuals, but it could also create a bigger gap between those who can afford the newest hardware and those who can't.
Exactly, and that brings up an important point about accessibility in PC gaming. We don't want to see a future where only the people with the most expensive rigs can enjoy the best experience.
So what's the answer then? How do we balance pushing those boundaries, making games look amazing, with making sure PC gaming is still something everyone can enjoy?
It's a tough one. No easy answers here. But I think it starts with awareness. Developers need to be mindful of how their decisions impact the whole gaming community. They need to find that balance between pushing the visuals and making sure their games are playable for everyone.
And we, the gamers, we need to do our part too, right?
Exactly. We need to be informed, make smart choices about what we buy, how we play.
Team effort, making PC gaming even better. But I think we both know, gamers, we can be an impatient bunch. We want the best graphics, the highest frame rates, and we want it now. Do you think we'll ever reach a point where VRAM isn't an issue anymore? Like, where we can just max out all the settings without even thinking about it?
It's a nice dream, right? And it's not totally impossible. I mean, look at how fast memory technology is advancing. Faster speeds, higher capacities, all becoming more affordable. It's not crazy to think that one day VRAM might be so plentiful and cheap that it's not a big deal anymore.
So there's hope for a future where we can finally say goodbye to those out of VRAM errors.
I'd say there's a good chance. But even then, even if we get to that point, there will always be new challenges, new boundaries to push. That's just how technology works, right? It never stops evolving.
And that's what keeps things interesting. Always striving for something better. But for now, back to reality. We're still in this VRAM transition period, right? So for our listeners who are trying to make sense of all this, what should they be thinking about when they're looking at that next GPU purchase?
Good question. First thing, again, don't panic. If you've got an HEV card and you're happy with it, no need to rush out and upgrade. But if you're looking to buy new and you want something that's going to last you a few years, 16 GB is definitely worth considering, especially if you're aiming for high resolutions, max settings, that kind of thing. Think of it as an investment.
Future-proofing, yeah. Crucial in the tech world.
Yeah.
What else?
Remember, VRAM is only one piece of the puzzle. Look at the overall GPU performance, the type of memory, your CPU. Don't get so focused on VRAM that you forget about the other things that affect your experience.
Right, I gotta look at the whole picture. Any final words of wisdom before we wrap up this part?
Do your research. Read reviews, look at benchmarks, and most importantly, think about your own gaming habits. What games do you play? What resolution? What kind of visual quality are you looking for? Once you know what you need, you can narrow down the choices and find the GPU that's right for you.
Okay, folks. There you have it. Part 2 is a wrap. We've gone from console optimization to the future of PC gaming. But there's one last piece to this VRAM puzzle we need to explore, the bigger picture. All right, welcome back for the final part of our VRAM deep dive. We've been dissecting this whole 16 GB thing, looking at the arguments, figuring out what it means for, for you guys, the gamers. We've talked about how consoles might actually be leading the way in terms of optimization and how AMD's kind of shaking things up with those new RX 9000 cards. But now I want to step back, look at the bigger picture. If 16 GB does become the new baseline, the new standard, what does that mean for the future of PC gaming?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? And it's exciting. I mean, imagine a world where developers have all this VRAM to work with. They can build these crazy, immersive, visually stunning game worlds, right? I mean, think about textures. It's so detailed you can like practically feel them.
Okay, yeah, that sounds pretty amazing. But you know me, I always got to play devil's advocate a little bit. What if this abundance of VRAM, actually leads to complacency? What if developers just start taking the easy way out? They just rely on throwing more memory at problems instead of, really getting into those clever optimization techniques.
It's a risk, for sure. It's tempting to take the easy route if it's available. If developers know they have like 16 gigs to play with, they might not be as diligent about optimizing for, systems that have less VRAM, or for people who like to hold on to their cards for a few years.
Right. So it's a trade-off, right? More VRAM could be amazing for visuals, but it could also mean that, the gap between those who can afford the latest and greatest and those who can't, it gets even bigger.
Yeah, that's a real concern. And it raises this question like accessibility in PC gaming, right? We don't want a future where you have to have like a top-of-the-line rig just to enjoy like the full experience.
So how do we balance that, right? How do we make sure PC gaming is still accessible, but also push those boundaries, keep making games look incredible?
That's the challenge, right? No easy answers. But I think it starts with awareness. Developers, they need to be mindful of how their decisions impact, the whole gaming community. It's about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Pushing the visuals, but also making sure their games run well for a wider range of systems.
And gamers, we have a responsibility too, right?
Yeah.
To be informed, to make good choices about, what we buy, how we play.
Absolutely. Gamers have a lot of power in this. We can support the developers who are doing things right, who are prioritizing optimization. We can be vocal about our expectations. And, sometimes we might have to be willing to like compromise a little bit on settings to get the performance we want.
Yeah, it's all about finding that sweet spot. I love that, this idea of everyone working together, developers, gamers, all of us to make PC gaming better. But okay, let's be real for a second. Gamers, We love those cutting-edge graphics. We love pushing our systems to the limit. Do you think do you think we'll ever get to a point where VRAM is just not a bottleneck anymore? Where we can just max everything out and not even think about it?
It's a nice thought, right? And honestly, as technology keeps getting better,
Yeah.
I don't think it's impossible. Look at memory tech, right? It's getting faster, higher capacities, all while becoming more affordable.
Yeah.
So yeah, someday, maybe VRAM is so cheap and plentiful that it's just not a big deal anymore.
So there's hope for a future where those out of VRAM errors are just a distant memory, a bad dream we all had.
I think there's a good chance, yeah. But even then, even if we get there, there would always be new challenges, new things to figure out, new boundaries to push. That's part of what makes tech so exciting, right? It never stops moving.
It keeps us on our toes, always striving for something better, something faster. But okay, for now, we gotta deal with the reality of VRAM. So for our listeners, those who have been with us on this journey, this deep dive, what's the takeaway? What's the one thing they should remember as they navigate this world of GPUs and VRAM?
The most important thing is there's no right answer for everyone. The right amount of VRAM for you, it depends on your needs, how you play your budget, all that stuff. Do your research, compare your options, make a decision that makes sense for you. And honestly, most important thing, don't get caught up in the hype. Find a GPU that's going to give you a good experience, whether that's 8 GB, 12 GB, 16, whatever it is.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Solid advice. And with that, folks, we've come to the end of our VRAM deep dive. Hopefully you found it useful, maybe even a little bit entertaining. Remember, knowledge is power, and now you're armed with, the info you need to make those smart GPU choices. Until next time, happy gaming, everyone!